Hello. Welcome to Juneteenth 101. This is the podcast where we discuss all things Juneteenth. I am your co-host, Dr. Cassie Sade Turnipseed, and today's session will be moderated by my co-producer and brother Kareem Muhammad. Hey, how you doing, Kareem?
Salam alaikum. Hotel, free the land, power to the people, all things Juneteenth.
Our other producer, Brother Sterling, had a family emergency, so he will not be joining us today. So, hey, Sterling, I hope all is well. This lecture series is presented by Do Better Productions, Bridging the Gap to Knowledge. That's the cotton picking truth, because when you know better, you do better. This series is incredibly informative on lectures that are presented weekly in partnership with Mississippi-based Cafre Inc., the local organizing committee of Greenville, Mississippi, and SRF Photography of Delaware, as well as Jackson State University's History and Philosophy Department and Juneteenth Festival producers nationwide, who are also members of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, NJOF. These lectures are designed to teach and or inform the world about all things Juneteenth. Our speaker today is Dr. Frank Smith. He's a commentator, civil rights activist, politician, and director of the African American Civil War Museum in Northwest DC. His topic today is standing up while fighting for justice. From 1959 until 1962, Dr. Smith attended Morehouse College in Atlanta, where he was the founding member of the Oh my gosh, excuse me guys, I'm gonna start all the way over because I just realized I'm not taping. Rewind. Hold up just a minute. Take two. Welcome to Juneteenth 101 podcast, the podcast where we discuss all things Juneteenth. I am your co-host, Dr. Cassie Sade Turnipseed, and today's session will be moderated by co-producer, my brother, Kareem Muhammad. Hey, Kareem.
Salam alaikum. Hotel, free the land, power to the people, all things Juneteenth.
Our other co-host and producer, Brother Sterling Funches, is not able to join us due to a family emergency, but we do wish him well today. This lecture series is presented by Do Better Productions, Bridging the Gap to Knowledge. That's the cotton picking truth, because when you know better, you do better. This series is incredibly informative of lectures that are presented weekly in partnership with Mississippi-based Cafre Inc., the local organizing committee of Greenville, Mississippi, and SRF Photography of Delaware. Also, Jackson State University's History and Philosophy Department and Juneteenth Festival producers nationwide, who are also members of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, NJOF. These lectures are designed to teach and or inform the world about all things Juneteenth. Our speaker today is Dr. Frank Smith. He's a commentator, civil rights activist, politician, and director of the African American Civil War Museum in Northwest DC. His topic today is standing up while fighting for justice. From 1959 until 1962, Dr. Smith attended Morehouse College in Atlanta, where he was a founding member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. Smith left Morehouse during his senior year to play a role in the civil rights movement. From 1962 until 1968, Smith worked with SNCC, organizing and registering African American voters in Mississippi and Alabama. He is noted for his involvement and leadership role in planning and executing protests and marches in Greenwood, Mississippi during the Freedom Summer of 1964. Essentially, he is what Juneteenth is all about. Please join me in welcoming to the mic my brother and yours, Dr. Frank Smith.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And you know, I went to Morehouse College back in the days when Benjamin Mays was president, and Benjamin Mays told the story one time about having been introduced by someone with such a lavish introduction. He said, "I wish my mother would have been here to have heard all of that. She would have believed every word of it." Thank you, Dr. Turnipseed. I wish my mother could have heard that for that kind of introduction. But let me just start out by telling the audience, first of all, I'm 78 years old, so I'm old enough to have remembered some of the things that I'm sure you all have forgotten and maybe never even thought about very much. But I wanted to clear that up because I went to college in 1959, Morehouse College in Atlanta. I took the back of the bus from my hometown in Newnan, Georgia to downtown Atlanta. I took the back of the Greyhound Fairmont Street bus from downtown Atlanta to Morehouse College, in the college community of that city. And my freshman year, by the end of my freshman year, I was involved in the sit-in movement in Atlanta, marching and picketing and going to jail. And it was there in 1962 that a young man who's going to be known as a legend in Mississippi one day, his name is Bob Moses. He was actually from New York, but he was in Mississippi then trying to register people to vote. He had been down in Macomb, Mississippi, actually more specifically in Liberty, Mississippi, trying to register some people to vote, tried to take a citizen's arrest on a white man down there and got put in jail and beat up pretty badly. And he left Mississippi for a little while on his way back to New York to pick up some more money, and some more organizers stopped through Atlanta and convinced me to come over to Mississippi for the summer as a summer volunteer, 1962, which I did. Never intended to stay, but I spent the summer there. And then that fall, after I came back and re-enrolled, a young person that we had worked with that summer got killed in Durant, Mississippi, and he dismembered his body. And Bob said to me, "Frank, this is the reason why we can't just come and then leave, because the people we leave behind get brutalized by these people. So we have to stay." And that was that time that I decided to leave school, take a leave of absence that ended up lasting about 5 years. I took a leave of absence to go off to register people to vote in Mississippi. And I went to Holly Springs. Now, we were a generation of young people. We were smart, we were educated. The day I put the key in the door at Morehouse, I became the most educated person in my family. Nobody had ever been to college in my family before. And my colleagues at all these other schools at Jackson State and Tulu and up in Holly Springs at MI, which was still open then, and Russ College and others, we were all first generation college students who were now picketing and marching and going to jail and risking our careers, really our future careers. But we had decided by then that our college education was not worth a whole lot if we couldn't get out of school and take our degrees and our training and get a decent job working in the industry or working in the state government or city government in these places that we could not get involved in because we were not allowed to vote. And so we decided, our generation decided we'd had enough of that. Somebody had to do something about it. It was our turn up the bat. And so that's how I ended up in Mississippi as a civil rights worker. And then in Holly Springs, actually more specifically in Bentham County, which is the next county over from the county that Holly Springs is in, I met a man named Henry Reeves who had his grandfather's rifle and he had his uniform. And he told me a story about Black soldiers actually his grandfather, who had been a soldier in the Civil War. Now, I'd been at Morehouse College for 3.5 years by then, degree in political science and history, and I'd never heard anything about Black soldiers being in the Civil War. I knew that there had been a Black sheriff in Holly Springs before, a Black mayor of Holly Springs and a Black sheriff in Marshall County during the days of Reconstruction. I knew that already. That's why we went over there. had Holly Springs was 75% Black in 1962. So I'm sure it was probably 85 or 90% Black following the Civil War. But once Blacks get the right to vote, they run for office, and during Reconstruction, they serve in office there. But I still didn't know anything about these soldiers. So I want to say to the young people who are students who are listening in today, first of all, pay attention to these little tidbits of information, because as you follow these things up, you may find they may turn out to be life-changing things for you. It was that photo, there was that outfit that Mr. Reeves showed me that day, and that Springfield rifle that he said his grandfather used as a soldier in the Civil War. He walked out on these battlefields, stood up for his freedom, came back to Benton County then. Started out with 40 acres and a mule, by the way. But by the time I met Mr. Reeves, they had about 250 acres. So he had grown that farm into a very large, prosperous farm there in that county. But I started reading and writing and thinking about these soldiers then. In no way I would have known then that 40 or 50 years later, I'd be in Washington, D.C., elected to the city council, representing the area of U Street that was devastated by the riots of 1968. And it would be my job to try to figure out how to rebuild that community, how to bring some life back into that place that had once been very lively, but had taken a turn downward after the King assassination and the riots of 68. It was my job to fix it up. So I came with this idea of building a monument to these soldiers. And so, as a council member, it was my job to figure out how to do this. It was my job to raise the money to make it happen. If I got to do all that, I might as well decide what we're going to build. So I used my executive authority to decide that I wanted to help build a monument to soldiers who had served in the Civil War. And let me just be a little bit more specific about this. We have 209,145 names of Black soldiers who served in the Civil War. The largest number of soldiers on our wall in DC come from the state of Louisiana, which had about 70,000 names. These people, most of them were enslaved when the war started. The second largest number came from the state of Kentucky. Third largest number comes about 23,000 from the state of Tennessee. And then fourth, a surprise that everybody seems to always forget, Mississippi had the fourth largest number, 17,000 African Americans from Mississippi who were formerly enslaved, put on these Union uniforms, walk out on these battlefields, fight their way to freedom, one of which was Mr. Reeves's grandfather, one of which was a man who's on my board of directors in DC, his great grandfather. I'll talk about him more in a little while, but these people, so this story has a story, this monument that I run in DC, this memorial that I run in the museum that I built, has its roots and ties back into Mississippi, back in the day when Mr. Reeves showed me that little nugget of information that he had already. And I took that to heart. And so somebody asked me one day, how long did it take me to build that monument? I said, well, it took about 20 years to do it since when I was in DC. But if you go back to the day when Mr. Reeves first told me about it, it took about 40 years to build it. So these things take a long time, but they get built because somebody takes an idea like that and they go out and make it happen. And I wanted to share that story to my audience, a lot of whom I know are students of Dr. Turnipseed's there in Mississippi. And at the end of my presentation today, I'm going to challenge you with a couple of things that I think you need to do to help us make this even better a story that we're talking about. Now, today's, I know that Dr. Turnipseed and most of your audience is talking about Juneteenth. And I knew Dr. Myers. I think everybody knows that every year he would come to Washington, D.C. for his program, and we'd host him at the African American Civil War Museum. He and I were on the grounds of Howard University many times for those reenactments that he presented. And so I got to know him well, and we all were sad to hear about his passing. But he did leave behind a legacy, and I'm sure Dr. Turnipseed and others that we know will keep that legacy alive. But Juneteenth is an interesting kind of a holiday. It's one of those things that's sort of steeped in African American history. It talks about a time in June of 1865 when the Civil War is over with, and I think we have to put it in some kind of context. The war is over with. To be more specific, President Lincoln has been assassinated, and then even before that, earlier that year in May, there'd been a parade down Pennsylvania Avenue with 200,000 soldiers who had it was a victory parade for the Union Army, which had won the war by then, because Lee had surrendered and his army had been decapitated, pretty much decimated. And so So as we think about June that year, June 19th, when Juneteenth gets its name and gets its history, many things would have happened before that, and yet there was this place in Mississippi in Texas near Galveston, where the people had not heard of the Emancipation Proclamation, and so what they were doing was what Lincoln had prophesied. What Lincoln said when he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he said, "Let the proclamation go wherever the army goes." And so now the army was entering Galveston in June, and reading, for example, reading there for the first time for many of the people there, passages. He didn't read the whole proclamation. He just he did excerpts from it, but the essence of it was to say that slavery was dead, and that the Confederate Army had been captured, and the nation had been held together. And the Congress by then had passed the 13th Amendment, had passed the Congress and was out to the states for to be ratified by all the states. And so slavery was dead in the United States. And here we were now, really in June, several months after the war was over with, and several years from the first issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation. The Army is now entering Texas. And so because of this great ceremonious event, there are several states now that have already adopted Juneteenth as a holiday. And as I think Dr. Turnipseed said earlier, and I agree with her about that, I think soon, and not very long from now, the country is going to make Juneteenth a national holiday, because I think the Black Lives Matter movement has opened up opportunities for new monuments and new museums and for new holidays. And Juneteenth is ripe for that because you've already got it in several states. It's got enough legacy and enough enthusiasm, enough interest, and enough of celebrations taking place already. So it won't be long before Juneteenth becomes a national holiday. Now let me mention a couple of stories about Mississippi, which I want to share with you that relate to these African American Civil War soldiers. I'm going to tell you about two of them right quick. One of them is a local story. There's a young man on my board of directors here in Washington, D.C., whose name is Lee W. Jackson. Jackson State will know Lee W. Jackson. He was the president of the student body at Jackson State College when the state troopers shot up that dormitory and killed people on the campus of Jackson State. Most people know about the Kent State shooting. Very few people have heard of the Jackson State students shooting. But Lee W. Jackson was the locally elected president of the student body at Jackson State at that time. He also was born in Natchez, Mississippi, just south of Jackson. You all know Natchez. Lee Jackson is a descendant of a Civil War soldier. His great grandfather's name was Buck Murphy. Buck Murphy was enslaved in a county just outside of Natchez at the time of the war. And when there was a time when the Confederacy made the people who owned slaves send some of those Confederates up to help rebuild Vicksburg, which was being bombarded by the Union Army. They were trying to take Vicksburg so they could move that material and the army supplies up and down the Mississippi River all the way to New Orleans. They needed to capture it first. But the South had decided that they were going to make the Confederates, the owners of these slaves, get a little free labor to help rebuild that. And then when they picked Lee W. Jackson's great-great-grandfather, Buck Murphy, they picked the wrong guy. Because after a few days of working out there on that fortification, somebody told Buck Murphy that the Union Army was fighting to end slavery. And so Buck Murphy decided that day, I'm on the wrong side of this thing. We ran away and went over on the other side and joined the Union Army. He survives the Union War. He survives the war, comes back to back to Natchez, and of course goes to work there in Natchez on that same plantation where he'd been enslaved. And by the way, Buck Murphy's plantation owner was Buck Murphy's father. That's right, I said it. I said it out loud. Yeah, these slave owners had children by Black women, and their children were slaves. They sold their own children in and out of slavery. They sure did. Their children were their children just as much as my children are my children. They sold them in and out of slavery. So, but Buck Murphy had the spirit of freedom in him. He went out and joined the Union Army, came back, lived in the Natchez until he died in the Natchez area. His son, as I told you before, his grandson was president of the student body there. He's now here in Washington, D.C., and I'm a member of my board of directors. He's a very successful, prominent lawyer here in Washington, D.C. Soon is going to be a judge, as a matter of fact. And I wanted to share that story with you because that's a Mississippi story right there. The spirit of freedom that was in Buck Murphy survived in Lee W. Jackson, his grandson, and Lee W. Jackson is carrying that spirit on. He's not only a successful lawyer here, he's the lawyer for the teachers union here in Washington, D.C. So he's still carrying out that fight. And I want to share that story with young people there in Mississippi because you've heard this before. As I started out on a plantation in Noonan, Georgia with no running water and an outdoor toilet, it's not where you start out from that makes a difference. It's where you end up. You can't do nothing about where you start out. You can't do nothing about whether you're born black or white, rich or poor, but you can do something about your life once you get hold of it and you can make something out of yourself. So I want to share that story with you. I'm sure that's why Dr. Turnipseed and others work so hard with the young people out there to try to make you learn everything you can, get excited about something in your life, learn how to do something well. And when you get a dream, like I did with the Civil War Memorial and these soldiers, hold on to that dream. Don't give it up. You haven't lost till you give it up. Don't give it up, because one day you might get an opportunity to do something for them. And so one of my proposals to you today, and I said this to Dr. Turnipseed already, I've been saying this now for several years. I think that the Natchez, Mississippi ought to have something called Buck Murphy Day in Natchez. They ought to celebrate an African-American soldier who joined the Union Army to fight for his freedom. Why do I say that? Because in Natchez today, they still have something called Heritage Day. Heritage Day is the celebration of the Confederacy. It's a celebration. You know, they put on those Confederate antebellum outfits. Lee told me when he was coming up, they used to pay kids, black kids, $2 a day or something like that to come out and dress up as slaves so they could look like little pickaninny slaves that were running around out there. The teachers in the schools in Natchez finally stopped that and wouldn't let people do that anymore. But I think that we ought to have a day where we celebrate an African-American soldier who started out on the plantation down there, who's buried in that cemetery. We know he's there because I've seen his headstone, by the way. So this is a very interesting story. One of those stories where I tell people sometimes, these stories are hidden in plain sight. They're hidden in plain sight. This cemetery in Natchez has a number of people buried there that are Union Army soldiers, including some, not just Buck Murphy, not the only black soldier buried. Several of them are buried there. There's some of them buried in Natchez, in Vicksburg, Mississippi, in the Vicksburg National Battlefield. So we ought to pull some of these stories up and lift them up so young people in Mississippi can see how well some of their people have done there in Natchez. Now, the other story that I want to tell you about, and I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you about that story too, and that is that when I first came, I told you I came to Mississippi, I came to Holly Springs. Those of you who know Mississippi as I do, near Holly Springs is a place called Corinth, Mississippi. Corinth, Corinth. I don't know how to use, I think we used to say Corinth when I was up there. I don't know what they call it now, what educated people called it, but it's a federal park now. It was a contraband camp during the Civil War, a contraband camp where runaway persons who were enslaved could run away to these various camps. Once the Union Army passed through there, they especially women and children, old people, weren't able to follow the army around. They set up these contraband camps. One of them was in Corinth. Now, I did not know about this contraband camp when I was there in Holly Springs, by the way. I probably knew about it, passed it a million times, running up and down those highways trying to register people to vote. But I don't remember it that much from my days there. I did learn, however, recently in the last 7 or 8 years, that First Lady Michelle Obama had her great-great-grandfather who ran away from a plantation in Alabama to Corinth, Mississippi, to a contraband camp. And it was at that contraband camp where Michelle Obama's great-great-great-grandfather joined the Union Army. That's right. He ran all the way. Now, he didn't follow. Y'all know Harry Tubman told people to follow the North Star and go north, young man. Now, you all know, if you know anything about geography, you know when you go from Alabama to Mississippi, you're not going north. Y'all know that, right? He wasn't confused. He just heard that there was a contraband camp over there. And somehow or another, he heard through the grapevine, because we didn't have no computers and no cell phones and and all that stuff back in those days. Everything was done on the grapevine. So he heard about it on the grapevine that there was a countryman camp, and he wanted to join the army. This man wanted his freedom. So he runs away, comes over there, joins the Union Army. And we start his story there when he joins the Union Army. And when he serves through the war, by the time the war is over, he is a sergeant. He joins the army, by the way, under the name Sutton, Jerry Sutton, Sutton, Sutton. And he says that when he joins the army under the name Jerry Sutton, he said, you have to put your address on your enlistment card. His address was the Hara D. Sutton Plantation in Alabama. Now, you know, in those days, I was born on a plantation. I told you that. I was in Georgia, and people said that Frank Smith lived on Miller Farmer's Place. That was the address. My address was Miller Farmer's Place. It was Route 4, Box 50. Jerry Sutton lived on the R.D. Sutton Plantation. That was the address he put on his enlistment card when he joined the Union Army. Now, I've seen that card, his enlistment cards, because I've seen a number of these cards. He joins the Union Army, and then when the war is over, by the way, by the time the war is over, he's a sergeant. He gets out of the army with some money in his pocket. He goes to look for his father, who he had not seen in 16 years. He goes to find his father. His father is living in Jackson, Tennessee. And his father is using the name Suter, S-U-T-E-R. So Jerry Sutton, when he reunites with his father, changed his name to Jerry Suter. So now we are putting this whole thing together, following First Lady Michelle Obama's family from that place in Corinth, Mississippi, back through Tennessee and upward, eventually through Southern Illinois to Chicago. And First Lady Michelle Obama's, that Sutton is related to her on her mother's side. Y'all know First Lady's mother. She was the one that was in the White House. She was the nanny to our children in the White House. Y'all know that, right? Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, 2 children, and grandmama, the nanny, who took care of them. This was a strong family, y'all, strong, tough family that grew up through all of these trials and tribulations. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a quick story about them in that Chicago one of my favorites. They eventually leave the South because they can't make a living there. They get tired of all of the violence and all the strife, migrate their way through Southern Illinois to Chicago. They're living in Chicago in 1919. They left Mississippi to get away from all this violence. And you all know, the historians in the room know that in 1919, there was a riot in Chicago. It was called the 1919 riot. And the slaughterhouse riot. A bunch of young white crazies were going around burning up black people's houses, pulling black people out, pulling them out and killing them. 37 black people killed, a whole bunch of them were injured during this. Well, Michelle Obama's great grandmother, Phoebe, was living in Chicago by then. Phoebe Johnson was living in Chicago by then. And the story goes that Phoebe had a pot of lye on the stove in the kitchen that she was cooking. And she said if they tried to drag her out of the house, she was gonna take some of them out with this lye. So we got Phoebe's pot and her stove that we're putting in our exhibit in the museum. Y'all know I like this, being a former politician in a big city. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I hope Phoebe had a little bit more than that to fight with, but if that's all she had to get it done with what she had to get it done with, right? I like that story right there. That's one of those stories that, so Barack Obama married into a very strong, deep, religious family in Chicago. What you all saw, what we saw exhibited in them in the public for all those years they were in the White House, there are very strong family roots that go back to the Civil War on her mother's side and on her father's side, from South Carolina on her father's side. So we're weaving those two stories together and that to put it in a new exhibit that we're going to open in our building in the fall. We bought a new building there in Washington. We're expanding into this new building. We're putting in some new exhibits. One of those new exhibits is going to be an exhibit called From Slavery to the White House, the Civil War Legacy of First Lady Michelle Obama. And that story too has some derivation in Alabama, because for some reason or another, Jerry Sutton, when he ran away from that plantation in Alabama, heading for his freedom, he ran to Mississippi, to Corinth, Mississippi, where he picked up with the Union Army, eventually ends up as a soldier, and as they say, the rest of it is history. So as we tell this story about the African-American soldiers, and we tell this story about Juneteenth, We have some wonderful stories that we can tell, and we have some many more things, Dr. Turnipseed, that your students can research for us there in Mississippi about individual families. You all know that after the war, Mississippi had two senators who were elected. You almost got a good one elected in this last election, but things went bad, and now you got, I won't say what you have in there now, but you had two good ones back in the day and during Reconstruction. And so we hoping that one day you'll be able to do what Georgia did, get Mississippi on the good foot too, so that we can do what we can continue this fight toward progress that we all want to see. And I want to just say, as I close out my presentation here today, that I am very proud to have played a role in trying to help bring freedom and civil rights to Mississippi. There were some times when I have to tell you the honestly truth. I was in Greenwood in 1963 and in 64. I was in Greenwood, Mississippi, trying to register people to vote. I got arrested in June of 1962. I was in jail in 1962 when I was drafted to go to Vietnam. I get out of jail. I've been in jail for 18 days. I called my mother back in Georgia to let her know I hadn't been lynched while I was there, and they didn't kill me and hadn't mutilated my body until I was okay. And she took about 2 minutes of jubilation. Then she said, "But I got some bad news for you." I said, "What is that?" She said, "You're late for the draft." I've been drafted to go to Vietnam. Here I am in Mississippi trying to register people to vote. They put me in jail for trying to register somebody to vote. I'm supposed to go 5,000 miles away to Vietnam to fight for somebody else's freedom that I can't even enjoy here in my own hometown, my own state, my own country. Y'all know that dog wasn't gonna hunt, right? There must be some country people on here somewhere that know what I'm talking about. Some dogs won't hunt. They may bark, but they won't hunt. That dog wasn't gonna hunt. Y'all know that, right? I wasn't no way in the world I'm gonna go off to know. But I wanted to say that we had to meet every need that America required of us. We had to pay our taxes. We had to obey the law. We had to serve our time in the military like everybody else. And yet we could not vote. We couldn't get a job in most of these places that we know about now. We couldn't eat in certain restaurants. We had to ride the back of the bus. We had to drink colored water. We had to give way to white people, any kind of a situation where they confronted us. Otherwise, we were going to end up in jail or end up at the end of some hangman's noose. So it took some courage on somebody's had to give up some time and some courage and give up some blood, sweat, and tears in order to change it. But our time came and we had to do it. And let me just say in closing that people ask me about this all the time. So let me just say it officially. I am very proud of the young people who are now in the Black Lives Matter movement. I knew that this fight was not over with, that there had to be another inspired generation of young people to take this thing from where it was and carry it all the way to the end this time. And so I'm very pleased to see that the Black Lives Matter movement has pushed this thing to the forefront now. There's no reason in the world why you saw Dr. Turnipseed, my 16-year-old granddaughter who put me on the screen a few minutes ago. She has a 21-year-old brother who's a young, handsome, smart guy. He's just got a master's degree and he's on the dean's list and stuff. But every time he gets in a car and drives out of here at night, we're all scared about him not being able to, if he runs into some crazed cop out there who pulled him out of the car for driving while black in 2021, we should not have to live like that after all the years that we've spent out here trying to make this world a better place. So I'm glad to see that the young people are firing this thing up one more time. And maybe this time we'll get it done and we'll get it done permanently. So in the spirit of Juneteenth, which talks about a time when we were struggling and fighting to end slavery, in the spirit of Juneteenth, which talks about a time when Black people were asserting our rights and our civil rights and our wish to be able to carry out all of the rights and benefits of American society. In the spirit of Juneteenth, I'm happy to be able to join you today for this presentation. I look forward to answering some of your questions. So let me stop right there. I'm sure I have talked enough for this presentation. I'm exactly 36 minutes in on my clock. You told me 40. So I'm going to stop right there, and you're going to get a chance to ask me some questions. May God continue to bless Mississippi. May God continue to bless America. Thank you.
You have a virtual standing ovation, sir. Well, I think that was really wonderful. And yes, I will be showing this presentation to my students come Tuesday. Everyone will see this. Okay.
Thank you.
I want to thank you again. And Brother Kareem, who will be moderating the question and answers. And so I see one hand already raised. And if you have any questions,
Can you
just
hear me?
unmute yourself and or raise your
Can
hand.
you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sister Rashida,
We can hear
can
you.
can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
Kareem.
you hear me?
Yep. I can't hear you now, Kareem. No, we can't hear you.
Okay, try it again.
That's Sade doing that.
No,
Sade,
I
keep
got
your
you
hands off the
unmuted. Kareem,
Sade, keep your hands off the button.
We hear you now.
we're trying to help you out over here.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we heard you a long
Keep your
time
hands
ago.
off the button.
We heard you a long time ago.
But I want to say that was a wonderful presentation, brother. I mean, outstanding. And we definitely honor you and your struggle and you still being here today.
Thank you.
Normally in my part of the of the program, I'm doing the interviewing and asking the questions before the audience come in. But when you first started, you took my first question from me about yourself. So that was beautiful. But so I'm gonna come from this perspective. In all things Juneteenth and being self-determination and what y'all did here in Mississippi to represent self-determination. One of my mentors is Dr. Hollis Watkins.
Okay.
There were several Black men that they talk about here in Mississippi, but we focus on the ones that this system did not destroy or did not assassinate. We know we got Medgar Evers and Emmett Till and those, but the ones that we hurl up is the Hollis Watkins, the Frank Smith, and the Bob Mosley. And so we definitely honor you, but I wanted Dr. Hollis Watkins always tell us a story about him in prison during that period and him being in on death row. So I would like, if you would, for a brief second or minute before I ask you the next question, tell us one of your most dramatic stories of being locked down and how close you came to death during this period.
Well, you know, I have, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. One about being in Atlanta. I was in jail before I came to Mississippi. I left the administration in Atlanta. It was a new jail. They just built this thing. Paint, you could smell the paint when we went in there. And
Your internet is going down.
Got put in solitary confinement because we wouldn't stop singing and praying and preaching and all kind of stuff.
You're breaking up, Brother Frank. You're breaking up.
No, we can hear him fine. That's you.
Oh, you can?
Yes,
We can hear him fine.
Okay, so anyway, so I got put in solitary confinement and the door jammed on this thing. They were supposed to let me out in 3 days. I ended up staying there for about 5 days. And they were so apologetic because some malfunction, the way this thing didn't work properly. And I thought that would be my last jailhouse experience. I said, you know what, they can't even let me out when they get ready. So I knew I'm not ever going back to jail again. But that was kind of an issue. One in that time that I was in jail that I talked about in Greenwood, they wanted to move us to Parchman, to the Parchman Penitentiary. In those days, people went to Parchman, they didn't come back. And we decided right there in Greenwood, we were not going to Parchman. They came and came in there with their shackles and stuff trying to get us out. And Lawrence Guillot, who was a Mississippi boy, I don't think Hollis was in there with us, and a guy named Jimmy Jones that Hollis knew very well, and Jesse Harris from Jackson. We ended up in a fight really right there in the lobby of the LeFlore County Jail, but they didn't take us to Parchman. I tell you that right now. Now I wasn't sure I was going to survive that one, but we were able to keep from going to Parchman. But let me just mention one last thing. I was It was June of '62 also when Mrs. Hamer, Uvesta Morris, Uvesta Simpson, and Mrs. Hamer and Mrs. Johnson, other people were locked up in Winona. And people try to accuse SNCC of being chauvinist because we actually try to protect as much as we could our women from doing certain things, but there was no way to protect them. In this case, they were coming back from a trip to Georgia, actually, had been to a workshop at King. They got arrested in Winona, and these women were mutilated and beaten. My job is to go from Greenwood over through Tallahatchie County, by the way, to Winona to get them out of jail, along with another person. We finally got them out of jail. Miss Hamer comes out, eyes all bruised up, and they've been beating her. And they had another young lady that I'm sure had been sexually molested and mutilated. And when they came out of jail, carrying whatever little belongings they had, Miss Hamer wanted to stand out in front of it. My first thought was, let's get the heck out of here. I never want to see this place again in my life, as long as I live. Miss Hamer wanted to stand in front of that building and lock arms and sing "We Shall Overcome." And my knees almost buckled. I was just, I was angry. I was mad. I was sad. I was disappointed. I didn't, it was hard to believe that people could treat people like that. But it was one of those moments, brother. It was one of those moments. We saw a lot of things, but that was one of the most awful things that I saw in my days there in Mississippi. Miss Hamer was a tough, courageous woman.
Did you actually sing?
Of course.
Yeah.
My version of singing.
You weren't gonna be with Fannie Lou and you didn't sing.
Hey,
Yeah.
listen, and now Hollis Washington could sing. We didn't all sing. Some of us just made a joyful noise to the Lord. The Bible doesn't say sing. The Bible says make a joyful noise. I can make a joyful noise.
Yeah. No, I'm saying at that moment when she got out of jail, and that kind of courage is just, I'm stunned, you know.
I remember there was one lady in the group named Nell Ponder. She just couldn't stop crying. Tears were running down her face. And it was just hard to, I'm supposed to be one of the young leaders, young Turks, I'm not supposed to be scared and mad and all that, but hey,
Yeah.
man, it was tough. It was tough. Some of these people are gonna have a tough time repenting for what they did to our people during all those days. But we were able to get through it. Miss Hamer was a tough leader. She sang our way to freedom and sang our way to glory. And she was an honor to know. Hollis is like that too. Hollis can sing too, brother.
Yes, sir.
Tell him I said.
I got several. There's no time that I'm with Dr. House that he does not want to sing or we ask him. Yes, indeed. But I thank you very much for that, Brother Frank. The second question that I want to ask you before we open it up to the question, because you made mention about several nuggets when you was talking. You talked about 1919, hot summer, the red hot summer, 1919, and that great mass killing in Chicago. You talked about several pieces, but what I want to ask you in regards to the museum in Washington, D.C., what are some of your plans moving forward? What do you would like to see done moving forward?
Well, I told you about one of the new exhibits that we have there that we're putting in about First Lady Michelle Obama. We are also doing something very special. The Emancipation Proclamation was a paper document that was issued by the president. It was very important. And as you could say, that Juneteenth signifies, the proclamation didn't mean much until the Army got out there and did something about it. Freedom didn't come to those people in Galveston until the Army showed up in Galveston. So that was true of the proclamation. Paragraph 8 of the proclamation says persons of suitable condition will be enlisted in the Union Army. And I'd like to say the way that works for us is these 200,000 names that we have on our wall march through that paragraph into the Union Army and join the Union Army to help fight for their freedom. These people were not granted their freedom. They weren't awarded their freedom. They fought for their freedom. They went out on these battlefields. Sometimes they had bullets of one caliber and rifles of another caliber. Sometimes they went out there for the first 18 months. They weren't even getting paid. They were getting paid half of what white soldiers were getting paid. They weren't, and they refused to take any money until they got paid what the white soldiers got paid. So for 18 months, when that great battle that the movie Glory talks about takes place, in South Carolina, those soldiers weren't even taking any pay. They weren't taking any pay because they weren't being treated fairly. They fought anyway. They put on the went out there and fought anyway because they knew they had to do it to get their freedom. But they weren't being treated right. So they were fighting on both sides. They were fighting on one side to get rid of slavery and fighting on the other side to make the Union Army treat them right, treat them fair, pay them what they were paying everybody else. So we're going to highlight the Emancipation Proclamation and what it did to enable these 200,000 names to march into the Union Army to fight for their freedom. Because at the end of the day, as was the case in the 1860s and was the case in the 1962, we have to fight for our freedom, and we have to find ways to make it all happen. And I think we have to hold those images up to our young people so they can know that there were people before them who stood up and they were able to persevere and survive. They moved this thing forward. This generation too will persevere and survive, and they will move this whole thing forward too. And so that's what we were looking for, and that's really what we're going to be able to show in our new exhibit, in our museum.
It's wonderful.
That's great. So again, we thank you for that. You made another point in reference to the soldiers, the Buffalo Soldiers, the cavalry. A lot of our people do not know that during this period of time, a third of the U.S. Army was Black military. The 8th, 9th, and 10th Cavalry was a Black regiment all the way. And so a lot of us don't understand that. And from
First Cowboys.
Yeah.
First Cowboys.
Yes.
We're black soldiers, Black Buffalo soldiers.
My point in making that is that, as you said, our any accomplishment that we made during that period was because, regardless of what they put on the books as far as legislation, without the military, it didn't matter. That's why in 1877, Tillman and Hayes compromised, and the compromise was to pull the military, the Black military, out of the South. Right. So I don't want us to leave here when we talk about Juneteenth, all things Juneteenth, self-determination. We don't understand the aspect of our brothers that went into that military and understood the aspect of armed struggle and how important it was.
Absolutely. And let me also just jump right quick to World War II also, because we have another part of our exhibit. We deal with World War I and II. We particularly focus on the Tuskegee Airmen, on their role in the U.S. Air Force in World War II. And let me just say right quick, the reason why they're the Tuskegee Airmen was because they were being trained in Tuskegee at Tuskegee Institute. The regular Air Force was being trained somewhere else. Right. They never intended to let these guys fly, and they wouldn't even let them into the regular Air Force because they didn't think we could fly. They had convinced themselves that the airplane was too complicated for our people to be able to fly, that we weren't smart enough, our brain wasn't big enough, our eyes weren't sharp enough, our fingers were not nimble enough. They didn't think we would be able to fly, but they went down to Tuskegee, gave these guys some airplanes, some P-31s. They took those things, and by the time they got to, by the time of Eleanor Roosevelt, first lady Eleanor Roosevelt showed up down there, got on one of these planes. They flew up in there and did a couple of flips with her. She came back and called her husband from right out there at Tuskegee. Said, President Roosevelt, these boys can fly these planes. And of course, you know, they end up in the military by the time World War II is over. These big planes, these B-52s, they weren't 52s then, I think it was 42s then, were calling for these guys to escort their bombers because they never lost a bomber. They were so good, they never lost a bomber. And so the war is over with. These guys now want to come back on the base and they want to be treated as officers because they were officers. Every pilot is a captain or above. They want to be treated as captains and lieutenants when they get on the ground. Like everybody else, go to the officers club and be saluted. And of course, they weren't. They had a segregated base and they had segregated facilities. And so these guys started their own protests and their own strike. And of course, in 1949, the military integrates primarily because of the Tuskegee Airmen and their fight. They brought this thing to a head in 1949. The rest of society did not integrate till 1954 with the Supreme Court decision, 54. So the military has had a very interesting role for Black people. You know, we joined it so we could prove to people that we're as good as anybody else, but I guess we also have to show them that we're a little bit better than anybody else in order for us to do as much good. It's an interesting story, and it's one that I think we ought to always talk more about. But my point is that the military integrates in 1949. The rest of it doesn't integrate to 54, and of course it doesn't really integrate until the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s.
to look.
But it's
And the military was the largest industrial corporation in this country at that time. So for it to go into integration was a great impact, along with who was that? What's his name? The American Dilemma, when it was written at that time as well.
Okay, we have 10 minutes, and so I think we do want to open up for questions.
Absolutely.
Okay. Stephanie Taylor had her hand raised if she still has a question. Sam Collins is next. Okay, Stephanie, unmute. There you go.
Oh, okay. Now, for me, his story stood out a lot because it shadowed a lot of my family history, and I found that to be exceptionally poignant. Number one, I never met my grandfather. He was already estranged, but that was due to the fact that he had to run away from Mississippi. His life was in danger after denying a white man what he asked for and telling him no. And I think the white guy called him a nigger and he hit him. So from there, he had to run and just whatever he had and take off out of Mississippi. So my family is in Boonville. My family is in Corinth. They're in Jackson. And I've heard many stories of Natchez. When you talk about this story and hidden history, what's most poignant to my mind is when Carl had mentioned the fact of what happened in Illinois when the soldiers returned and they burnt up all their information, Carl, in the doctor's office or the coroner's office.
Mm-hmm.
It's that, the fight must continue, and it's not a fight. It's an unfolding of education. It's a pushing through history. We're not going to allow them to deny the facts because that's what's crippling. And as Opal said, white people are in bondage just as well as Black people are because history is being denied.
Know about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, a mob destroyed all the records of the 29th United States Colored Troops from Illinois, and they did it deliberately. It was deliberate to deny them pensions. And when they checked back with the Surgeon General's office, they say there are no medical records on file for the United States 29th Regiment of Illinois.
Mm-hmm. And then my mother, she's a sharecropper. So all the time while she would braid my hair or whatever we were doing, if I'm holding her hands, my hands were running over the bruises or the cuts in her hand from picking cotton and going to school halftime. So in her household, yeah, we do have rumors that there was a white man who did something to one of them. We also know that my grandfather, he said, no, you're not leaving out of the plantation. And this was in Texas. So same thing, different areas. He thought he had made it when he got to what he thought was equitable on the plantation, Now we got a little cabin next to the creek, But it's this that's in my blood that allows me to continue to say there's more education, more that needs to be done. Okay. There's too much of our history buried. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Stephanie. Sam Collins has a question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Turnipseed. Dr. Smith, first of all, I want to apologize for being late to the meeting today, but I would like to ask if you would be available to come to the Galveston area. I put it in the chat, the dates, because we do need to share this history. I have family from Laurel, Mississippi, Collins family, and I've located an ancestor in the names and bought the book of names. So I want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing for over the years, and hopefully you'll have time in your schedule to to come down to Galveston and help tell the truth of the men with the guns coming to Texas. And I've read that as many as 75% of the Union soldiers in Texas were United States colored troops by January of 1866. So this is something that has not been talked about much in Galveston. So I am looking forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Well, I've never been in that part of Texas, and I look forward to seeing it one day. So,
yeah, May or June, if your schedule allows, we'll get you here. We're going to have an event Memorial Day weekend. If you're available Memorial Day weekend, we could get you here. If not, then June 18th, 19th, and 20th, if you're not busy, we'd love to have you here for our Juneteenth celebration.
all right. Well, let's. I had both of my shots already. Now, you had your shots yet, Samuel?
Oh, no.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right. So, how's Texas doing? Y'all getting y'all shots down there?
I got my shots, and my dad, my grandmother got their shots, and Texas is wide open. But I'll make sure you're safe because we got to protect the warriors like yourself. I'm not gonna let nothing happen to you here in Texas.
Okay, I told you I'm 78 years old. I got to outrun this COVID. I can't fight it. I'm too old to fight it. I got to outrun it.
Y'all scaring me now. 1 minute y'all talk about revolutionary fight, the next minute y'all trust the same thing. Y'all scaring me.
Okay, Sam, you do need to put your information in the chat. I don't see it here. So
I'll send it through him as a direct message, but I'll put it in
okay, great. That's
I'll
fine.
put all the contact information in there.
And I think Steve Williams and Delridge Hunter are eager to ask a question. Go ahead in that order.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me. All right. Okay. Well, I've been there many times. You know that. Yeah. Yeah. John Franklin Jr., John Hope. Yes, John W. Franklin. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Do that.
Okay, Dr. Hunter?
There are a number, can you hear me?
Yes.
There are a number of museums in Alabama and Mississippi. I've been to them. Are you doing anything at the museum in DC to let people know that there are also complementary museums in these locations? One is on B.B. King. I've been to that one. The most notable one is in Montgomery, Alabama, where they have two sections. One with all of the lynchings, and the other one is housed in a building that lets you know who the places and where the places were during the civil rights movement and the lynching. They complement very, very well the museum in Washington, D.C., and people should know about them. When we were there, we did not find that many African Americans who seemed to know that they were available. Is there some way of creating an integration of communication about how all these museums that are now around the South can be connected to the one in DC?
Okay. That's a good question. Actually, two things on the answer. One is that there's an association of African American museums. And before COVID, each year we held a meeting in different locations.
Okay.
Matter of fact, the last time I was in Jackson, I was there for a meeting of the Association of Museums. And I got to visit the new museum in Jackson, which I think is pretty good, actually. And I agree with you in general. I think that there are some very, very good museums in the South. I love the fact that when you fly into Jackson, Mississippi, you fly into Medgar Evers Airport.
Yeah.
I just love it. I was there when Medgar Evers got shot, and they got a little exhibit down there on Medgar Evers. And
Yeah, I taught at McEvers College in the city in Brooklyn.
Yeah. So I went to the last time I told you this, Dr. Turnseed, I was in Ruleville a few years ago, and you get to the city limits, it says, "Welcome to Ruleville, a home of Fannie Lou Hamer." And of course, now the post office is named for it down there. So there's some really good museums in the South. We have not been able to make that kind of a breakthrough on the Civil War. I'm working on that right now. As I told you before, I wanted to get Buck Murphy Day down there but there ought to be some monuments in every one of these Park Service battlefields where African-American soldiers served. There ought to be a monument to African-American soldiers there. Yeah. They got plenty of monuments to the Confederate soldiers who were there in these battlefields, none to these Africans, as though in many of these battlefields, as though we didn't exist. We didn't do it. And so we're going to do something about that. Dr. Turnseed, you're going to help us with that.
You know, I'm with you 100%.
We'll do something about it. We got control of the House and the Senate this year. We got the White House. I'm going to give them a list of things that I think they need to do. And it's going to be on the top of the list right here.
And make sure I'm on that committee.
And you know, I was going to ask you that question, being the stories that you told and being so close to the situation at such pivotal times. You know, today is a pivotal time.
Right.
So if you had to look at yesterday versus today, what do you think one of the main things was that we may have done wrong collectively? And if you had it your way, what would be one of the things that you would want to lead out with today?
Okay, I've never done this before, so I'm gonna take a risk but I guess I told you I was 78 years old, so my Alzheimer's was kicking in a little bit. So do something that's absolutely stupid. But let me say two things here. One, I think that by the time when I just heard last week that a young man in Mississippi named Jesse Morris just died. Jesse Morris, I knew from the Civil Rights Movement. You may know him, Dr. Kareem from Hollis Watkins.
Yeah.
Started something called the Poor People's Corporation.
Yeah.
He was trying to put together a cooperative that was going to help young people who made various artifacts and things like that to sell them through a co-op so they could make a living at it. He was trying to develop some kind of economic base. By the time Dr. King was killed in Memphis, he was trying to help poor people who worked worked on trash trucks to get more money. And so he had turned his attention. And I think that we need to take another look at the way the Muslim movement had organized economic development opportunities. They had, as I remember it, they had and you know, a lot of people from SNCC became Curtis Muhammad became Curtis Muhammad after the Civil Rights Movement. Hollis Watkins took on an African name. The daughter you just met, that you just met, her mother's name is Malaka, named for El Haj Malik Shabazz. So but I think we need to take a look at that movement and how that movement had organized to grow stuff on these farms, ship it to these cities, market it in these cities, because African Americans have got to find a way to shore up our economic development in such a way. And we now make enough money and we spend enough money so we can make a difference. We could actually make some things for ourselves that could make a life better for us, more of our people. And so that's one of the things I think we need to take a better look at. I think that we study them to see what they did right and to see what they did wrong, so you can avoid the mistakes that they made, so that you could build something that will be sustainable and that will go on to make a difference in our community. So if we were to do that, and then the next point I want to make is this: as long as there are monuments on the horizon, there ought to be some monuments for Black people. If you're going to have thousands of monuments up there, half of them ought to be monuments for us.
That's right.
That's my approach to Juneteenth Day. I like Juneteenth because we don't have enough holidays. Anytime we get an opportunity to get another holiday that we can rally around and do something good with, let's do it.
That's right.
Okay, one other really quick question, please, sir.
Stepped out for so long.
And that is, you mentioned the military aspect of what happened as well. Coming that, I was raised on a military base. So, inside those walls, diversity is treated a lot differently than it is in the civilian world. So Eisenhower had made that rule so that, hey, if you got to fight together, you need to learn how to live together.
Right.
So what do you think about that and where we are still having to fight for our rights in the civilian world? We do still militarily, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, don't say it ain't happening in the military.
It is. I just mean you can, if you do it too overtly, they do have things that can happen to you.
Well, let's start by changing. But let's start by taking these Confederate names off of these military bases.
Exactly.
Let's start with that. My oldest son was in the 101st. He was trained at Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg is named for a Confederate traitor, a Confederate soldier. So let's start with that. We shouldn't have to. Black people should not have to live with the indignity of being trained and on these bases. They got all these units. That's something we can do now. And I'm glad to say that the Democratic Party now has taken this on. It's about time. We changed, the rest of America has changed to a great extent, trying to take those names down. Let's change those names. Let's get some more mindedness up. There's some simple things that we can do out here, you all, that we can do right away. Let's get those done. The difficult ones we'll do later. But let's do the easy ones right now.
Like the Cotton Picker Monument Project. We're going to get that done.
All right.
If I may quickly as we go, is that I want you to think about as well as we move forward, the Centerville Massacre in Mississippi.
Oh, yeah.
All those military individuals in 1901 and so forth. So those are some pieces that we got to put together and make more known as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for all that you gave to us, the listening audience. We thank you for your input, your questions, and your statements. But we would like to ask you to definitely tell a friend about the podcast and come back next week.
Okay. I would like to thank every one of you so much for joining this week's lecture, and I certainly hope you will, as Brother Kareem said, please tell a friend, bring them along so that they can learn these very important things about African contribution to American history. Our next week's presentation or podcast is going to be Sunday, March 21st at 5 o'clock. And our speaker will be Dr. Delridge Hunter, Professor Emeritus from Medgar Evers College in New York City. He will present the essential needs of African American Studies degree programs in HBCUs. And this lecture series is presented by CAFRE Inc., Local Organizing Committee of Mississippi, the SRF Photography in partnership with Jackson State University History and Philosophy Department, and Juneteenth Festival producers nationwide who are members of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, NJOF. So please join us again every Sunday at 5 o'clock right here in the Zoom room. When you know better, you do better. Brother Kareem.
Okay. Amen. Amen.
All right.
All right. Brother Kareem.
Okay.
Brother Kareem, you got any closing remarks?
Yes, again, peace and love.
All right, y'all. Hotep.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. See you next week, Brother Dr. Hunter.
All right.
I'm gonna call Dr. Doctor. I had to let him know he was on the show, Frank.
All right. Thank you very much, man. Tell Hollis I said hello.
I definitely will.